Welcome back. Let's continue here now. The IMF, in its recent report on the economy, revised global economic growth towards downwards for 2023 to 3.0%. And when it comes to South Africa, it pegged the country's growth at a mere 0.1% in June. There's a general sense that economies that have not been easily able to bounce back following the impact of the COVID-19 lockdowns around the world. Senior business reporter Nompumelelo Siziba spoke to Gita, Gopinath, a former IMF chief economist and now the first deputy managing director at IMF.
Pleasure to join you, Nampu. If you're looking at global growth, we're seeing a weakening outlook. So in July, we had projected that growth for this year would be 3%, and last year that was about 3.5%. So we're seeing growth slow down, and into the medium term, it stays at around 3%. Which is the lowest growth projection we've had since 1990. So globally, we are seeing a growth trajectory that is on the softer side. In terms of inflation, we are seeing inflation coming down in several countries. Headline inflation is coming down, but there are stickier components of inflation, like service sector inflation, which still is stubbornly high. Actually, South Africa is a country where inflation is doing very well compared to many other countries in the world.
So let's get straight to South Africa, shall we? And our growth trajectory hasn't been doing very well at all. And your estimate is that we're going to grow at about 1.5% over the medium term. This year, the IMF is looking at 0.1%, which is really, measly. So given that, how concerned are you about South Africa's debt trajectory? And do you think enough has been done in terms of the structural reforms that need to kick in order for us to get meaningful economic growth?
For South Africa this year, we're projecting growth at 0.3% because of the hit from the energy crisis, which is having an important bearing on the economy. Going forward, like you said, into the medium term, we have growth at 1.4%, which is just about keeping pace with population. So it doesn't help in terms of raising living standards. On the debt issue, this is a very important challenge for South Africa. We are expecting debt to grow further into the future years. So our projections, for instance, for the share of revenues that has to go into just paying the interest payments on that debt is projected to grow from 19% this year to 28% in 2028. Now, this year, South Africa spent about 13% of its budget on health. So we're talking about a number that's at least twice as big as the number for health spending this year. So I think this is a very important challenge. Because we're seeing weaker growth, revenues are likely to come down because commodity prices are not going to be what they were, right after the reopening of economies and the energy crisis that we had around the world. That source of revenue also gets hit. So it's very important to further strengthen fiscal consolidation in South Africa.
Unemployment is one of our key challenges in South Africa. Many people have said it's a ticking time bomb. And then we've got the reality of the new fourth industrial revolution, as well as things like artificial intelligence, which forms part of that. Given this reality, how concerned are you that South Africa is going to be able to have a competitive workforce? We know that there's still issues around the educational outcomes, particularly in the public sector.
Like you said, when it comes to issues of job creation and ensuring that the labor market is ready for the jobs that are going to be there, there are some long-standing structural issues that need to be addressed. The quality of education needs to be improved. Labor market flexibility is going to be very important. Product market competition is going to be very important. And if you want to be able to have growth and create jobs, you need an energy sector that works. Right? And that's critical. I mean, addressing the energy crisis that South Africa faced this year, for instance, is absolutely important to make sure that you can have a growth of industry and you can have jobs being created. In terms of the new technologies that are coming, I think it's still unknown at this point how artificial intelligence is going to affect number of jobs being created versus jobs being lost. Historically, we've seen technology has on net created jobs. So there is still that hope, but I don't think that's clear yet. But it is important for people to be ready for these structural changes in the kinds of jobs that would be available.
We know that the COVID-19 pandemic wreaked havoc on everyone right across the world, and that's part of the reason why it's been difficult for there to be growth momentum post the COVID crisis. We're now hearing about cases in America and other places. Whatever happens, do you think that there needs to be a different strategy around how to manage that? Because surely no one in the world, especially emerging markets, can afford those lockdowns that we experienced in 2020.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to go back to that period when we were all shut down and we couldn't even meet our loved ones. I mean, that was a really dark period. The WHO is still looking into the new strains of COVID virus that's going around. There is no expectation that there's going to be another public health crisis, at least at this point. That's the indication. But to your question of what we have to do differently, I think it's very important that we have what we call surge financing, which is in 2020, when the pandemic hit, there were many countries in the world that needed financing for putting in their vaccine orders in place, that it took a while for that to come. And every month counts in this business. So making sure that there is surge financing available, and yes, the global community is working towards that to put such a mechanism in place at the World Bank, that's going to be very important. It's also very important that we collaborate in terms of information sharing through our surveillance, making sure that whoever's seeing a new strain shares that information very quickly so the global community is ready for that. And we need to do much better in terms of how vaccines get allocated than we did the last time.
So Gita, of course, South Africa hosted the 15th BRICs Summit last week. A lot of discussions being had, the announcement of an expanded BRICS formation, and also conversations around relying less on the US dollar, using more local currency, looking to boost trade and investment, to really boost these emerging markets, although I don't know if there's a debate around whether China is still an emerging market. But what are your thoughts around everything that took place, and specifically as it relates to South Africa? How much of a benefit do you think it can be to its economic fortunes?
We welcome this expansion of BRICS. We welcome the ability of countries to come together that enhances their economic integration, that enhances their dialogue. I think this is all extremely beneficial. In terms of increasing the use of their currencies on the global stage, the best thing that countries can do is have very sound policy frameworks that give confidence in the currency and also make their currency have deep markets, easy convertibility. Now, these are the kinds of steps that will encourage their use by private agents. I mean, that plays an important role. It's very helpful for South Africa to be, of course, engaged and play a leadership role in these fora, as they do at the G20. So we welcome it all around.